the other point is that if you're not so worried about it, you're not going to look for the triggers. And it's very common, especially with children, that if father chews gum and that's a trigger for them, they walk into the room, they're going to look at their father and say, "Are you chewing gum?" And he goes, "No, I'm not." And then they're watching, go, "But I think you are," that they're really almost tracking the person, trying to see, are they making a trigger or not? Again, that's the sort of behavior that you must stop. I worked with a family and had made good progress in general, but we hadn't really finally conquered the misophonia. And the final component was for the daughter to never look at her mother unless she was speaking to her mother or her mother was speaking to her, because she was looking for the triggers. And when she stopped looking for the triggers, that was enough that let it go. So let's see, I covered adding noise, don't be tortured by triggers, learn to relax, and that's where the progressive muscle comes in. Or the other issue with progressive muscle relaxation with the Misofonía muscle relaxation app is that you can target specific muscles. So, for example, if your initial reflex is in your neck, then rather than doing a full body session, which is about 15 minutes, you could do an intensive neck session of about, let's say, 3 minutes, and do that 3 times a day as you develop the ability to relax these muscles on demand. And so that's the reason for the progressive muscle relaxation, is that it develops the ability to relax on demand, which can help with anxiety and specifically with the ability to relax in the presence of triggers. Other things that I know that have helped some people, emotional freedom technique of tapping, where you're tapping, here and then here and then here and here. That tapping can bring down the distress level and can be beneficial. It's a short-term management technique, but bringing down your distress level then helps you in multiple ways. I'm not sure that I covered everything there, but
yeah, I think that you covered everything and more.
There's one other thing I want to mention, and that is the ability to bring down individual triggers through gentle exposure, right? That strong triggers hit you and you got to go, ah! Okay, but a little trigger could go boom and be gone. So this is called counter conditioning. And one of the ways of counter conditioning is to use an app called the Misofonía Trigger Tamer app. And this app lets you play a trigger sound, a recorded trigger sound, and you can either record them yourself or you can use the ones that are loaded into the app. But with the app, you can play a trigger at whatever settings you have for it, which is how often, how long, how loud. And so here is an example. This is an old-fashioned telephone, so it's not going to be, hopefully it won't trigger anyone. But this is, right, you heard a little bit of a ring there.
Yes.
Right? Or as time went on, right, we could bring it up to, a louder sound. And so with that little bit of a trigger, while you are playing video games, watching Netflix, while you're walking outside, and you're just getting that little bump and then gone, bump and then gone, it allows the lizard brain to back down. And in the course of 30 minutes or less, you will see your reaction to that sound decay. And so if, for example, you're starting with, let's say, chip crunching, and you're starting it at, let's say, 4% in a third of a second, then, and your reaction, let's say, on a scale of 0 to 10 is a 3, then after a while, you'll notice it's not a 3 anymore, it's a 2. And then you may raise the volume from 4% to 5%, it comes back up. And then after a while, you notice it's gone down to a 2 again. Well, now I'm going to raise it to 6%. And then it comes down. I'm going to raise it to 8%. And then it comes down. And so this is a way, using normal life recreational activities, that you can microscopically reduce your triggers. And so that's often incorporated into the treatments that I provide.
Well, I think that that's a very interesting app and a very interesting idea. And well, also talking about avoidance and exposure, what do you think about exposure therapies? I mean, fully exposure to the trigger sound.
Well, if you're talking about exposure to a normal, everyday trigger sound, exposure to a typical trigger, then that will make misophonia worse. In the vast majority of cases, that makes misophonia worse. There's been one mention of it in the research literature. There was a Schroeder and company article out of the University of Amsterdam, and they mentioned in this treatment that they did for misophonia treatment trial that they had tried what they called mere exposure to the sounds, just hearing the sounds, and it said it in most cases, actually what they said is it didn't help, and in some cases it made their misophonia worse. So yeah, it's mere exposure to triggers is not beneficial. However, the good use of noise, so most people with misophonia have AirPods or earbuds or something, right? And so you can use a noise app to play some background noise, and then that will take the severity of the trigger down, let's say from an 8 down to a 4. And then at that level, you may be able to relax and focus your attention on other things and start getting this counter conditioning effect and get the reflex dying down, because small triggers with a relaxed body and a distracted mind makes misophonia go down. So one of the techniques is just looking at things, noticing specific items in the room, looking at details of shapes and sizes and focusing on there. If you're in a car with a trigger, you look outside, you look at trees, and you don't just simply say, oh, there's a tree. You go, oh, look at the limbs on that tree and notice the details of the limbs. That really pushing your attention onto something else is very positive. As well as, I'll go back to share this again, as well as trying to rip your brain, this covert mental review, what you think after the trigger, can go on, can be a short time from, a few seconds to hours. And actually some people have long as a day to recover from trigger events. And part of it is that you keep thinking about that trigger and you're reviewing the characteristics and the reasons and all of the injustice of it, and how if they really thought that they really cared, they wouldn't make that sound. And you've probably experienced a lot of that thoughts that come after a trigger, and getting rid of this mental review of the trigger can be a very powerful, critical factor. Just, you got to rip your mind away from it and go on, because if you sit there and think about it over and over and over, you are telling your brain that was a really important event, very significant, remember it because it's so important. But if it's like a fly that lands on you and you shoot the fly and you keep on going, that's an unimportant event that your brain's not going to remember.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, actually. I really like to hear you talking about that, and you're very clear with your ideas and all your thoughts. Talking about therapies, techniques, and more, is there any research supporting the use of medication or pharmacological interventions in the management of misophonia? And under what circumstances are they typically prescribed? Please note that I'm not seeking a prescription or anything of that sort. I'm simply looking for an idea of if there are any medications that could potentially help or serve as a reference to discuss with our personal doctors.
Yes, of course. Of course, we are not providing medical advice, right? Yes. So, morally, we did a study and a survey and asked, have you asked misophonia severity, what are your triggers, and what have you tried? And in this study, we found that there was some, on average, positive response for people who used medication for anxiety and depression. But it appeared that it was only for cases where the person had anxiety or depression that was independent of their misophonia. So if you have a generalized anxiety disorder and you're generally anxious, that will make your misophonia worse. And so if you take medication for anxiety in that situation and your general anxiety goes down, then that can help your misophonia go down. Because we know that there's a relationship between health and well-being and misophonia severity. So as your health and well-being goes up, your misophonia goes down. And as your health and well-being goes down, your misophonia goes up. So it appeared that if a person has a problem with depression, has a generalized problem with anxiety, that medication for treatment of those conditions can be beneficial. Okay, now, there's another drug that is a blood pressure medication called propranolol, Propranolol. And propranolol is a cortisol blocker. So when you are, and this varies from person to person, but for a lot of people, when you're triggered, you get this physical, the explosion of distress. And those that have that, that's caused by cortisol. That's a cortisol release into the body. And so those who experience that strong cortisol release can benefit from propranolol because it reduces the after effect of being triggered. Okay, now propranolol is also known as a medication that's used for stage fright or presentation anxiety. If you're a person who gets really anxious when you're getting ready to give a presentation and you're getting the jitters, propranolol helps with that also. So that's an effect of reducing your physiological reaction due to cortisol release in your body. There is a journal article on that, I believe. Dr. Jaden Webb is working on that professionally and from a research standpoint. I've had patients who've used propranolol. It's not like a treatment for anxiety or depression, that's often an SSRI for those drugs and for those conditions. And an SSRI must be ramped up very slowly. And if you don't like it, then it has to be ramped down very slowly. Propranolol is an instant acting drug. If you want to try it, you try it. Oh, that didn't work, or oh, that made it better. Now, I'm going to give a caution here. If you use propranolol and you go, oh my goodness, my experience of being triggered is no longer an 8, it's now only a 5. This is good. I can tolerate it a lot more. And now you're tolerating more triggers. Tolerating more triggers may cause the trigger severity to go up. So you see the problem there, right? That because it's no longer a 30-minute agony experience, it's only a 1-minute agony experience. Now I can tolerate this. I can put up with it. So that is a risk of anything that lets you tolerate triggers that may increase your severity.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Tom, and for talking about the risks. And on the other hand, I think that is very important to communicate to the people around us about our condition. And I wanted to ask, how can someone effectively communicate their misophonia experience to parents who are resistant to understanding or accepting it? And are there any resources or educational materials specifically designed for parents to help them better understand misophonia and its impact on their child?
I don't know of specific information that's designed for parents. However, you clearly have watched the video Misophonia, What Is It? Right?
Yeah.
And I highly recommend that for a child to watch it with their parents, because I think that video makes it very kind of real, that it's something that it's not this unknown mental disorder. It's not the little brat disorder, which often in a kid would look like they're trying to control the family and they're screaming and yelling at their siblings. It's a normal neurological process that's developed in the brain. And so I think normalizing this as to something that we know what it is, and we do know what it is, can be very beneficial. That's my opinion. Now, there are parents who just don't want to hear it. So I've seen that in cases where they're unsympathetic to their child because it's so inconvenient for them. But I think that's less common. Mostly it's that they just don't understand and they think it's something their child could just stop doing.
Conoce MisoWeb hoy. Regístrate y sé parte de la primera página web creada para formar una comunidad de personas con misofonía. Únete a nuestros grupos de apoyo para descubrir y compartir experiencias, consejos y herramientas. Además, en MisoWeb encontrarás noticias relacionadas a la misofonía. También podrás aportar tu granito de arena llenando las encuestas publicadas en la página. Y si tú tienes una idea increíble para que MisoWeb crezca, entremos en contacto. No olvides que puedes aportar esta causa para mejorar el sitio dando clic al botón donar. ¿Qué estás esperando? Sé parte de MisoWeb ahora.
I want to bring up one thing here. When we talked about the muscle relaxation training, this app, Misophonia Muscle Relaxation, has 4 languages in it. So it comes in it's fully native for English, Spanish, Portuguese, and German. So when you download the app and open it, it'll ask you, choose a language. And so this has Spanish embedded in it. And as a plug for the app, it's a free app. You can do the basic features for free, no cost. And then if you want to do customized timing or selected muscles and things, then there's a fee for that. But the basic app is free. Are we going to talk about neurologically what happens when you do muscle relaxation training? Is that on your list of questions?
Yes.
Okay, so then you can let you get to that. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I actually use that app a lot, and I have already shared it in my Instagram account a long time ago, but I will share it again. Because as you said, a very big advantage is that app is available in a lot of languages. So continuing our discussion, I saw your video where you discussed the concept of the thinking brain, emotional brain, and lizard brain. I think that we talked about that before. In that context, I would like to ask, it's not very clear to me what happens to the thinking brain of individuals with misophonia. Is there limited information available regarding the extent to which the so-called thinking brain is involved in their condition?
Well, actually, there's an interesting thing about what we may not think of as the thinking brain that goes on in the cerebrum. But if we look at the cerebrum, okay, we think of emotions as coming out of the limbic system, and that is true. When you're happy or sad or frustrated or angry, that's the limbic system. But the control of this when you are triggered is actually coming out of the cerebrum, out of the thinking brain. So there's a spot deep in the cerebrum called the anterior insula cortex. And this spot is an emotional regulation center, and it gets both the external stimuli and the internal stimuli. So if you hear a trigger and your hands flinch, that muscle sensation is an internal signal up to the AIC, as well as the sound is an external signal to the AIC. The VMPFC is an emotional reflex learning structure. So we think of this as the thinking brain, but this is not a lot of thinking part of the thinking brain. And this spot takes a normal thing like a smell, and you experience that smell and like, oh, it's holiday time, or oh, I'm at grandma's house. And smells have the ability to do that because of this reflex center here. And so if you are triggered, let's say by crunchy chewing, and you get a crunch signal, it gets the physical and the outside sound. It relays out, what do I do with that? It goes, oh yes, that's anger and rage and disgust, and it relays it back. And then the AIC fires down into your amygdala and hippocampus right beside it, and you get the emotional explosion. So, and the strength of functioning of these neurons is increased because of their heavy use. The brain has the ability to strengthen reactions rather than when it uses neurons, it actually makes the neurons work faster and smoother and less crosstalk. And so that's what goes on here out of the thinking brain. However, I don't know of any research about the ability of using your forebrain to plan or control or what you do. I just know it seems almost impossible for people to remember and do things when they're triggered, right? It drastically it takes over. It's almost like you're being possessed. Is that close, that the triggers just kind of take over, like you're being possessed. And I tell people that I work with jokingly, okay, I said, I start out serious, right? Well, misophonia is not a sign that you have a brain defect, that you don't have anything wrong with you. You don't have some chemical imbalance that's causing this problem. You don't have neurons that are randomly firing. You don't have short circuiting of the auditory neurons hit the emotions, and you get the anger explosion. So it's not a short circuit. You don't have some defect in your upper brain telling you that these sounds are going to hurt you. It's normal neurology. But when you're being triggered, it really possesses you. It's like you're being possessed. But the one thing I'm absolutely sure of, Marley, is that when you're being triggered, you are not being possessed by aliens, okay? So even though it may feel like alien abduction, because it takes over, but it's normal neurology. So I don't know for sure what we've looked at with the emotional, with the cerebrum work, but practically we know that your cerebrum is compromised.
Okay.